it's overwhelming, but it's also our jobs.
Our job is only going to get harder.
It's worrisome.
This is something that's unprecedented.
Now is not the time to be a cowboy. No one has anything to prove. We're all in this together.
Welcome to Reporting from the Frontlines of the Pandemic. I'm Elizabeth Perkin, and I'm here with Catherine Lazerwitz, a producer at WBAL in Baltimore, Maryland. Thank you, Catherine, so much for being here with us today.
You're so welcome. I'm happy to do it.
So our first question for you is, how have you adjusted to working during a pandemic?
Well, I, in some respects, am lucky in that our producers are still going into the studio. But the big adjustment has, of course, been our schedules, since we're trying to keep as few people in the building as possible. So I am now working 4 days a week rather than my usual 5. And then, of course, the biggest change is the reporters are no longer allowed inside the building, as well as the photographers. So, again, just to try and keep as few people in as possible. So, so it's odd. In some ways, my days are very much the same, but in some other ways, they are drastically different. But the great news is everyone sort of hit the ground running. So our reporters have adjusted well. Our anchors, the studio, they have to be separate in the studio. So figuring out how to put them in places, during the show while still bringing them together when we can it's been very interesting. But obviously what we're doing is so important. And we've already heard a lot back from the community thanking us, for staying on and keeping them informed. So it's been great.
And then how have you guys dealt with covering the news in this time? Are you going to different sources? Are you trying to reach more locally, more nationally? What is your aspect and how you're trying to cover it?
Sure. So focus is still local. So our reporters, of course, working in a very different way than they do normally, are still interviewing people, socially distant, safely, obviously. Another big adjustment we've done, which has worked really well, is doing interviews, just like you and I are right now. With Skype or FaceTime, depending. The technology has really just been sort of amazing. The focus has still stayed national. And we in Maryland, Governor Hogan has, of course, been very prominent, just even on the national stage as well. So I think by that virtue, by covering him, has also been part of the national conversation as well.
Has it been different since I know that Maryland just enforced a lockdown? Has that limited what you guys can do more so now than you had been in the last couple weeks?
I'm in the tricky position of my off days now Monday, Tuesdays, and Wednesdays. So I can't really answer that because I'm not entirely sure. Since adjustment into effect today, or rather last night. What I can tell you is all of us who are still driving to the station, so that's some of our operations staff, producers like myself, and our anchors, as well as certain managers. We all have our little letters of official, government, essential employees. So that I can tell you, we've been prepared for this order to come through. I imagine it's changing. You'll be seeing more and more Skype interviews from us rather than some of the few in-person interviews we've been able to do. But beyond that, I couldn't honestly say yet. Check back in with me next week, I can tell you.
Okay, that sounds good. So have you gotten pulled over or anything where you've had to show that you are essential work staff?
Not yet, but again, I imagine that will now have gone into effect as of 8 o'clock last night. So I am prepared. I have it in my bag. So
that's good.
Yeah.
And so, since the whole coronavirus started, what kind of precautions are your station taking specifically to keep everyone safe, both in the studio and outside of the studio?
Sure. As you can imagine, Hearst Television and then us at BAL have been just absolutely fantastic. Especially our news director and the head of the station, our president, have been wonderful. Really, the biggest thing was having a plan in place. So probably, I think this might be week 3 or week 4. As you can imagine, it all kind of blends together.
I feel that.
Yeah, I'm sure for you. Our station had a plan to basically split up into A team and B team, which was, basically to have, a couple people on and then a couple people off. just to try and, again, minimize the number of people in the building. So that's worked well. And of course, social distancing, even before the shelter in place went into effect last night, I know everyone at our station had already been obeying the governor's, suggestion at that point to social distance, stay at home as much as possible, limit your exposure. And I think that all has been great to just, not only set example for the public, but also just, to practice what we preach. That has also been social distancing in the studio itself, in the newsroom, where I've always been the weekend producer, so I laugh like the weekdays now look like the weekends where we have, a skeleton crew on. Yeah, and just, carrying on and practicing good hygiene. And yeah, but I think the station has really, like I said, it's amazing how adaptable you can be, and I think our station in particular has just done a wonderful job of keeping our coverage going, informative, accessible, even in a time where it seems like that might not be possible.
That's amazing. Did you ever think that something like this could happen where like people could be working remotely? Because like I know even some other stations are having like all producers working from home, all anchors working from home. Did you ever think that something to this caliber would ever happen in news?
To be honest, it has been sort of a wild ride watching this all unfold. So could I imagine it? No. But once it became clear what was kind of coming down the pipe with the coronavirus, like I said, I think it's just been amazing. Like some of our anchors are going from home. Our sports anchor has been filming his stuff from home and sending it in. And it's, again, like the technology is just amazing. And I think what's even cooler is how news, and I've watched other stations, local stations, the national channels as well, how everyone's, sort of just taken it and run with it to make it possible. Because there is nothing more important than being accessible and following, the guidelines in this time.
That's really good. So you have also started a podcast with one of your anchors at your studio, Jason Newton. And so what has that been like? Your focus is mainly on the coronavirus and ways to stay safe, like social distancing and washing your hands. So what has the response been, and like what made you guys want to do this?
Yeah, well, it's kind of funny. It started out completely before the time of coronavirus, if you can remember those days. And so he and I talked about this back in December, expanding what had been our TV show, which was 11 TV Hill, our weekly public affairs show with this station, and just finding a way to reach more people, be a bit more dynamic, and frankly, there's so many fantastic people we wanted to interview, and simply we're running out of time for a half-hour show each week to get to everyone we wanted. But then, of course, the coronavirus outbreak happened, and it was sort of the perfect opportunity to hit the ground running with the podcast, because we were no longer able to interview guests in studio, and then they decided, for obvious reasons, to put the show on hiatus, just because, we just had to sort of make adjustments. And frankly, I'm not sure how we could have figured out to do the show via Skype interviews live every week. Like that, I think it was probably a good call. So Jason and I stepped in with the podcast and really ramped it up in using it in a way that neither of us had seen or foreseen, really. And it's just been great. Our latest one was talking to a counselor, and we both just found her so helpful, and we were just so glad that we could record that information directly from her and bring it to our viewers, just as we would with the TV show. And the podcasts, as you can imagine, are great because you just need, Jason's got a soundboard, and then you just need a telephone, and you're off to the races, and there you go. So, yeah, it's just been great, and I think a real example of, just ingenuity in this time.
Mm-hmm. And what has the response been from people listening?
Well, we joke it's mostly our families at this point, but I couldn't tell you. We have a couple of 5-star ratings from Apple. So unfortunately, I can't tell you really more of the response from that. But my mom gets it.
That's good. Yeah, I'm actually taking a podcasting class as well this semester.
Oh, wonderful.
So it's very interesting. Last night in my class, we just learned how to make sure that your podcast is getting out there to viewers by scanning it correctly. So very interesting stuff that I've been learning about it.
Your pointers.
I could go back through my notes from last night's Zoom class.
Yeah, no, truly. That's
So,
fantastic.
what else, like, do you feel that you're taking on a larger workload on the days that you are working because of the A and B team? Like, are you producing a longer time frame of the show, or?
Some of us are, some of us aren't. I'm a bit on. Me and the weekend morning producer we're the two producers on 4 days because we have to be there Saturdays and Sundays. So our other colleagues are working much longer days. They're working 3 12-hour shifts, often producing more than one show. That's been par for the course for the weekend. So in that way, I'm sort of used to the workload anyway. But no, I mean, I'm now producing. We have a 9 o'clock hour of news in the morning that had been the Today Show's third hour, but they've obviously had to cut back. So we stepped up to fill up that time. And that's been cool. I mean, it's not often that you get to start a brand new show. So yeah, like I said, I think it's really just about teamwork in this kind of time. So it's everyone stepping up to do what they can do. And I'm just grateful to be a part of such an awesome team.
And then just going to a little bit about you personally, like what made you want to get into producing? What was the push that was like, this is what I want to do?
Well, that's an easy one. Her name is Marcia. She's your professor. Yeah, no, and she'll happily tell you. I had done a lot of different work. When I graduated from college, I was a restaurant manager, if you can believe it. And then I moved up and down the East Coast doing different things. I worked for a campaign at one point. Then ended up at grad school in Boston and ended up working for Marcia while I was getting my MFA in creative writing. So watching you guys, her students, who I always found so impressive from the first, and working with them made me realize it's like news seems like a pretty cool business, you know. I wonder if I could do it. And when I finished up my grad program, it was with Marcia's help that I put together my own little practicum show. Although this is much cooler than what I did. Yeah, and I used that to apply for a producer job, and that's where I got my first gig up in Portland, Maine, at MTW. And then I was lucky to have an opportunity to come here in Baltimore that I applied for, and luckily got it. So I really fell into the business, truly, and was just lucky enough to have Marcia sort of guide me through it. But as you know, it's so cool what you can do. And I couldn't recommend it more than I do now.
That's amazing. I'm like in the phase where I'm not sure if I want to be a reporter or a producer, and like in the last like year and a half I've definitely been doing more producing work, but I still like have like the itch to report, and so
yes,
it's like very uncertain times.
As I remember what Marcia said, because I think, Liz, are you a junior? Do you have another year?
I have one more semester, so I'm graduating
You're graduating in
December.
Yeah.
Okay.
So what Marcia will probably say to you at some point, but I will happily snag her on this one, was, you know, look into your heart, and do you need to be on camera?
I've heard that one. She always says that one. Yeah.
Yeah, no, but I think that's right. And I can tell you, you know, the producers, you know, we are somewhat chained to our desks. So just something for you to consider, because it is tough sometimes. You're watching the reporters go out there and have all the fun. You're just like, okay, I'll just stay here, you know, that type of way. But there are other ways too, you know, like the podcast has become a cool thing that I didn't see, you know, coming. That has been a really interesting way to kind of get out there in a way that I hadn't anticipated. So anyway, that's just my 2 cents.
It's very much appreciated. Speaking of advice, is there any, like, what's your advice that you'd want to give to someone going into broadcast journalism?
Sure. And as you imagine, these times have really put a fine point on how I've approached this job entirely. I think the biggest thing is just never forget you're part of a team, you know, because there will be days where it feels like you couldn't possibly do it, or other days where it just feels like, what am I doing this for? Like, and it is like any job. But remember that you're part of a team is that you always have someone to turn to for help on the days that you're struggling, and on the days that, you know, sometimes you forget why you're doing what you're doing. It's like, look around and see what everyone is pushing toward and creating. And then you turn on the television at, 8 o'clock or, 5 o'clock in the evening, or for me, 11 o'clock on Saturdays and Sundays, and say, I did that. I got to be a part of that. And I think that's the best thing to keep in mind. For practical advice, listen to what you write. Yeah. say it out loud, however works for you. But hear it first, and make changes. Because then when it goes to air and you haven't tweaked it, you'll hear it and go, oh, that didn't quite sound right. So that's my other bit of advice.
That is great advice to give. Is there anything else that you'd like to tell us about yourself or like how you are doing during the coronavirus? I feel incredibly lucky, especially to be able to not have to work from home yet. Just because I think that's sort of my bugaboo is like, that's the big adjustment I'm not sure if I'm mentally prepared to make. So I hope it doesn't come to pass, but it's all about safety. The best of luck, and great work to all of you guys and to all of my, all of our fellow Emersons out there in the field and in their homes and, on the anchor sets, because I think everyone's just been doing a phenomenal job, and it's never been more important to do a good job than it is right now. So good luck to everyone. That's amazing. Thank you, Catherine, for taking the time to talk with me today, and thank you for all the work you're doing to keep us informed and safe. And thanks to all of you for watching this episode of Reporting from the Frontlines of a Pandemic. I've been speaking with Catherine Lazerwitz, a producer at WBAL in Baltimore, Maryland. I'm Elizabeth Perkin.